I am so excited, listeners of the We Rise podcast, to introduce today's guest. Dr. Faith Okpotor is a humble, wise leader, and she has great stories to share with us today. So, Dr. Okpotor, would you please introduce yourself so folks know who I have the delight of speaking to today, please?
Of course, thank you so much, Christine. I'm so delighted to be with you, and you can call me Faith. Um, I am a college professor of international relations, and my area of research is political violence and international security with a special emphasis on Africa. I also recently started a new project that provides college admissions coaching to students from marginalized communities in the United States and students from developing countries who want to study in the United States and get admission with full funding and avoid debt. So those are the things I'm working on
Mm-hmm.
currently. I'm originally from Lagos, Nigeria. That's where I grew up, and I came to the United States to study to college, to come to college, and the rest is history.
Very, I'm sure, non-circuitous, very linear path from from your upbringing to now. So I want to dive in. For listeners, we did have a call before this one to just touch base a little bit, and that's where I'm so excited to really talk more about that spark and what allows people to make a decision and engage, particularly for community members um, who might not have the norm in their communities to study abroad or to make change. So I do want to get into that in just a little bit. But before we get there, tell us a little bit more, Faith, about your background and your story. What drew you to this line of work? If you want to weave in more about your history, I welcome that too.
Okay. So I grew up in Lagos, and where I grew up, usually people get really narrowed into their focus starting in high school. And if you are a high achieving student or a bright student, you're usually pushed towards the sciences.
Mm-hmm.
I don't remember, how when this started, but I remember for as long as I remember, I wanted to be a doctor, a medical doctor.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was in the sciences. I did well in high school. In Nigeria, in high school, everyone takes something called the West African Examination Council exams. That's the exams you take after high school.
Okay.
I did really well in that. I was one of the best results in the country, that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
And then eventually, at the time that I was growing up, there was all kinds of political issues going on. We're under a military government. We're transitioning. There was electoral violence. It's funny, I study
Mm-hmm.
electoral violence now. but
Mm.
but anyway, um, and so all of that happened, and then I wanted to. I've always also wanted to come to the United States. I think back when I was in, let's see, that would be 11th grade, no, 10th
Mm-hmm.
grade.
Mm-hmm.
There was a parent teacher conference with one of my teachers, and she was the geography teacher at the time. And, when I wanted to go to one of the best medical schools in Nigeria. And I remember her telling my dad, like, you really should have this kid go abroad, like,
Mm-hmm.
really.
Mm-hmm.
And so I started thinking about it. Of course, I had family. My mom's sister, she had spent some time in the United States and had some of her kids here. So that's when I started looking at colleges in the US. And then I ended up at Hampshire College in Amherst, Massachusetts. I was still on the path to becoming a doctor. I studied
Mm-hmm.
microbiology and creative writing. I did my senior thesis research at Stanford in a transplant immunology lab. I did all that
Okay.
stuff.
Right.
But at the same time, I was also a student journalist. I'd been a student
Mm-hmm.
journalist from high school. I was a student journalist because I started college in Nigeria and then I transferred here.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so I was also engaged in what was going on in the world politically.
Yeah.
Um, and so after my first degree, I decided I was going to be a journalist. So I packed up my stuff, moved to DC. I
Mm-hmm.
had an internship on Capitol Hill.
Oh,
And then
interesting.
I ended up
Huh.
working in news in DC for a little bit. I went to
Interesting.
journalism school and got a master's in journalism. I covered
Sweet.
politics in DC and in Chicago.
Wow. Huh.
And then eventually, I decided I wanted to think a little bit more deeply about these things. And so I decided to pursue a PhD program.
Mm-hmm. And
And here
and
I am.
tell us more about the PhD
Oh,
program.
sorry, in political science.
And what was that like in your dissertation and
Oh boy. One of the things you talk about on the show is the issue of resilience. And as I was thinking about this, I said, my entire life is a story of resilience.
mm-hmm.
Um, so in 2009, so right around after the crash, the economic crash on
Mm-hmm.
Wall Street, the housing crisis, um, that was the year I also decided I was going to apply to PhD programs. I was working as a
Mm.
journalist in Chicago, and I applied to several programs, I think five or six,
Mm-hmm.
and I did not get into a single one.
Mm. Oh, yeah.
I got rejected at
Yeah.
every single one of them.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't know what I was going to do. And I was like, I thought this was going to be the next thing. So I decided to put all my stuff in storage, and then go. At the time, I hadn't been in Nigeria in 6 years.
Okay.
So I put all my stuff in storage. I decided to backpack across East and Southeast Asia
Uh-huh.
and do a lot
Wow.
of thinking.
Yeah.
Spent some time in Cambodia and in India. Spent some time in an ashram. Long story short, I decided to apply again. And the more importantly, I went back to, and this is what happens when you want to do something, and you're not making headway, or you don't know what to do, you go look for people who have done it and you talk to them
Mm.
and you learn from them.
Mm.
So I went back to one of my college professors
Mm.
who was the only social science class I took as an undergrad. And she told me to reapply, and she told me to talk about my research chops. So I had research chops, but
Yeah.
not in
Mm-hmm.
social sciences. I was in the
Uh-huh.
sciences, and
Interesting.
I never
Right.
talked about that. And
Interesting.
she said I needed to emphasize that,
Mm.
regardless of whether or not I was changing fields. So I did
Mm.
that. So I spent a year abroad, in East and Southeast Asia. Ended up in Nigeria. Spent some time with my family.
Mm.
Reapplied,
Mm.
and then got several offers. And I ended up. I came back to the United States in 2010. I ended up at the University of Delaware.
Okay. Wow. That's fascinating. So that moment, can you talk just a little bit, Faith, about what that moment was like? I think so many of us have had that experience of we're planning to do something. We have a course, we have a trajectory, we have a direction we're heading in, and for whatever reason that doesn't happen, and we're thrown a curveball. And it sounds to me like you not only did you not you didn't use the word hide, but you chose to explore, to take some time for reflection, and to you know, backpack across the globe. What was that like for you? And what do you think that travel offered you an experience maybe outside your comfort zone, maybe not outside your comfort zone? Can you talk a little bit about what that process was like for you as you decided to reapply?
Yeah, I mean, I was traveling alone.
Mm-hmm.
I had friends in different in those parts of the world. So I yeah. So my first stop was in South Korea. I
Mm-hmm.
spent some time at a school called. At the time, I had my very very good friend of mine was getting his PhD at a school called the Gwangju Institute for Science and Technology, which is in Gwangju, not in Seoul. It's
Mm-hmm. Okay.
away from one of the biggest cities in the country.
Mm-hmm.
And I spent a lot of time there, just every day waking up, thinking, visiting places around the country, writing,
Mm-hmm.
journaling, and trying to figure out what I wanted to do next. And then I that's when I went back to my roots, so to speak. I started
Mm-hmm.
talking to, my former professors, talking to
Mm-hmm.
people. Um, and I met a lot of people.
Mm-hmm.
Yesterday, I was just going through my address book and trying to,
Mm-hmm.
looking through people, and I remember all the people I met from
Mm-hmm.
different parts
I
of the
love
world.
that.
Uh, you know, at sites in Cambodia, in Siem Reap, in Phnom Penh, in India,
Mm-hmm.
and I just got to meet so many people who were also doing interesting things. And the thing is, it all seemed at the time that this was, oh my God, what am I doing? But by the time it came time to write my personal statement, I had an interesting story to tell.
Oh, interesting.
I had
Uh-huh.
been to all of these
Uh-huh.
places. I had
Right.
been a journalist. I had covered politics in Washington. I had been a science student. I had
Mm-hmm.
cloned genes. And so I had this interesting story to say,
Yeah.
I'm probably the only person applying to this program who has staked out, the chief of staff of the White House and cloned a gene and
Yeah.
slept in an ashram. So
Right.
I will bring some interesting things to your program.
Yeah,
I
I
guess it
love
works.
that. I love that. I love that. And it's so interesting to hear what it's been one of the common themes of the podcast, Faith Over Time, is where people have that choice to dig in and face it or to retreat and hide and what happens after that. So I love that is just such a great story about what you chose not only to explore, to learn from people who you had learned from before, and then to use that as fodder for what you were doing next.
Yes.
So tell us a little bit more. So originally medical doctor, then journalism, PhD. Tell us more about what you're up to now and communities you're working with now.
Yeah. So I am in the higher ed community.
Mm-hmm.
And so in my day job, I teach political international relations courses. I study conflict, so I teach, African politics, international relations, politics of developing nations, things of the sort. I do my own research. I've spent time in the field in post-conflict situations in West Africa, particularly places that have had electoral violence, because that's what I
Mm-hmm.
study.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and at the same time, I work with students, and this is one of the main drivers for this new project I'm working on. I work with students, and I see how many students struggle, particularly with funding for college,
Mm-hmm.
right? So, some students who are not as well off, um, they don't have, they're working so hard to
Mm-hmm.
try to cover college costs.
Yeah.
And as many of us know, um, the forces of globalization over the last 20, 30 years have been good for some, right? It has increased prosperity. We're more interconnected. People can, markets are connected. People can buy and sell across the internet to whomever, and that has created immense wealth. But at the same time, it has also cut out certain communities.
Mm-hmm.
Factories have closed, jobs have been moved elsewhere, that kind of thing. And so you have increased inequality, and we see that in the United States. At the same time, college is often touted as the vehicle for upward mobility. Go to
Mm-hmm.
college, get a good job, and you entrance into the middle class,
Right. Right.
right? But at the same time, everybody forgets the issue of debt, and so you either
Right.
have students who take on so much debt that when they graduate, they are starting below water,
Mm-hmm.
or you have students who are afraid of taking on that debt. And so they're working much harder than anyone should work
Mm-hmm.
while also pursuing a college education.
Mm-hmm.
And so they're not really having a good college experience. Neither are they actually putting the time necessary into their studies.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so people are actually not getting the experience they should get out of college. And so that's why I'm starting this program to provide college admissions coaching for students from communities historically excluded from higher education, and to help them start on a good footing. Get into college fully funded, where all your costs
Mm-hmm.
are covered, and then
Mm-hmm.
you can focus on studying, and then maybe doing a good job and getting that good job that can give you the access to upward mobility.
Love that. I love that. So, two questions. Are students that you're working with folks who often have a strong internal drive to go to college, or is that something that communities are often telling them they should do? How do you find that? And then how do you find the funding? Where, tell us what those connection points. It's a hard thing and such a roadblock for so many people to start out with massive debt out of college. It's such a, mental, spiritual, emotional block for so many people and such important work. Tell us a little bit more about that internal drive and, how the funding works.
So for now, I'm starting with students who want to go to college,
Mm-hmm.
right? Who are interested in going to college, but are not sure about the funding. Um, the first step is choosing the right colleges. There are lots of colleges in the United
Mm-hmm.
States. It
Mm-hmm.
might not necessarily be all the big names that people know,
Mm-hmm.
right? But there are lots of colleges in the United States, more than 100, that have
Mm-hmm.
committed to um, fully funding students
Wow.
uh, beyond the expected family contribution.
Okay.
So whatever it is that your the expectation is that your family can afford, beyond that, they're ready to fully fund you if you have the good grades and if you get accepted into the college. And so
Yeah.
the admissions question is blind to the decision to fund. right? So if students can get into those colleges, and many people do not know about some of them, if
Mm-hmm.
students can get into those colleges, and get their application right and do all of that right, and then they can you know get access to starting on a better footing. Um, and of course, as an international student, when I came to the United States, I did not have the option of student loans.
Mm-hmm.
And so
Mm-hmm.
I had
Yeah.
to, and my family could not afford to pay completely out of pocket 100%. And so I had to apply to those kinds of colleges.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and that's how I ended up where I went. And I was able to get considerable funding that covered whatever else that my family could not cover.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So it sounds like connecting people with the information. It sounds like there's a big
That's right.
disconnect there often.
Yeah.
So if we can broaden out a little bit, you've probably worked with a number of colleges or students at this point, particularly in your teaching career. What are you noticing kind of across the communities, across individuals that you're working with? What is really helping folks to get into college, to write successful applications, to feel like, yes, I can do this, I have the internal capacity to do this, and what's keeping students back from doing that, from feeling like they have the ability to jump in and go for it?
A lot of it is community support, so support from families,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
So if their families are supporting them and think it's a good idea, or sort of helping them and say, okay, you
Mm-hmm.
go ahead. Um, there was just a news article recently about I just saw that the numbers of Black and Latino men going to college, deciding to go to college has dropped. And a lot of the discouragement happening now is the funding issue and the potential for debt,
Mm-hmm.
because it's almost as if it's no longer worth it
Mm-hmm.
for a lot of people. And so
Mm-hmm.
the,
Yeah.
the, the family support, the the assurance that the finances are sort of taken care of, those things are actually top of mind for people
Mm-hmm.
when they're deciding about um, the choice to go to college, or which college to go to, and things like that.
And how do you find students can create or find a sense of community support if it might not be in their family of origin? I don't know if that's something you've encountered very often, but that is the case for some community members that I've worked with. How do you develop that internal sense of this is something I want to do when it might not be something that is part of your background to have that sense of
Yeah.
support?
I mean, a lot of it has to do with different community organizations. So, for example,
Mm-hmm.
even within college, right, there's like lots of first generation students
Mm-hmm.
who no one in their family has ever done this before.
Mm-hmm.
And when they, even within college, when they come to college, sometimes they're not even aware of the unwritten norms and rules for how
Sure.
things are
Yeah.
done,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so a
Mm-hmm.
lot of it has to do with providing support specifically for those kinds of students who do not come from families where anyone has done it before, do not know the things that are supposed to be done. So, for example, many of those students will not know that, oh, I need to go to office hours. It's
Mm-hmm.
okay to connect with my professor,
Yeah.
those kinds of things. And they're not going to know until they are told. And so, what you find now is many colleges have specific programming for first generation students. Um, so that's helping. And I would imagine that those kinds of programs at the high school level too, to help students um, apply to college, or to help them think about college as an option, um, is important. Now, some high schools are more resourced than others,
Mm-hmm.
right? So you have
Mm-hmm.
high schools where the college counselors are so burdened,
Mm-hmm.
and there's not,
Yeah.
there's like one counselor for however many students, and they might be overstretched, and that's where the gap exists.
Mm-hmm.
And so the question is how to connect some of these students with appropriate programs that would help them, and affordable programs that would help them. So I'm hoping that in my own little way,
Yeah.
that this new program of mine will be would serve that purpose.
And are you doing this through the academic institution you're teaching through, or are you doing this on your own? Tell us a little bit more about, how folks can learn more.
Yeah. So this is a separate project that I'm working on my own. And if people are interested, they can send an email to collegefullyfunded@gmail.com.
love it.
And I'll give you more information about it. If people want to see my professional profile, I'm on LinkedIn,
Okay.
and so you can see my full professional profile of things that I've done academically and otherwise.
So Faith, you're acting as a connection point. It sounds like where there really aren't connection points. So you've identified almost 100, maybe more institutions where there's a commitment to being able to provide access. How do you find students? How do you connect with the students to then help them connect with these academic institutions? How do they find you?
So I'm actually building my first cohort now for the fall.
Awesome. Oh, as
And
a
so
group. Oh, neat.
yes, it's a group, so they can support each other,
Love that.
and they can be part of the same program and send all of the applications in at the same time. So this is the first cohort. So it's going to be a 10-week program where we'll take everything from your list of schools to how you write your application
Oh, I
essays,
love
to how you fill out your financial aid forms, to which schools to apply, to all of that. So throughout the 10-week program, the expectation is that by the end, they will have their documents ready to go to submit to colleges and they can turn in the applications. But they will have each other, as a group, and they can all do this in one cohort. And then, come back, in the spring, we can come back to say, oh, it's decision time. Where did you get into? How do we pick where to go to and
Love
things like
that.
that.
So you're building this community of support. It sounds like
Yeah.
you know what the challenges are of not having those mentors maybe to ask questions of initially in the first round of PhD programs you applied to. So you're providing that support structure, it sounds like, for a connection peer to peer, student peer to peer, but also to be able to go through a process at a similar time. I love that.
Yes.
What's the
Yes.
name of the program, Faith? Do you have any?
College fully funded.
That is the full program. I love it. That's so great. I love that. I love that. So, want to, find out in the future some of the lessons learned from folks. But the fact that it's a supported environment is so cool. So, tell us a little bit more about yourself. I want to dive into some of, questions about joy. Joy has become something that we've focused on a lot in the podcast. As you know, and as we've talked about just a little bit, the last 2.5 years have been such a very hard time for so many people. And I think that focusing on joy and those things that really do light us up is even more important while still recognizing the very intense struggle that folks are going through. So there's both, there's that duality. Um, so podcasting is one of the things that brings me great joy. Tell us a little bit, Faith, about what brings you joy.
Oh, that's so good you said that. Um, the last 1.5 years have been difficult for
Mm-hmm.
everyone, no doubt. Difficult in the academy, difficult for faculty. You might have been seeing stories about morale being down.
Mm-hmm.
Difficult for students, moving from normal to online to now we're coming back to normal. Um, so yeah, that's been hard. I find joy spending time with my son.
Mm.
I have a 5-year-old,
Oh,
and who is very curious and inquisitive and just thoughtful and kind. So I derive joy from spending time with him.
that's such an awesome age. You're
Yeah,
through the 4-year-old stage, and the 5-year-old stage is such an awesome time.
yeah,
Um,
yeah.
yeah. So the flip side, what keeps you moving forward, Faith, on the days that you struggle? Something that we ask podcast guests because I think it's something that we need to honestly talk about with each other. Um,
Yeah. I mean, it's my values
mhm,
and why I do what I do. So
mhm,
I do what I do, because of my child, my family. I do what I do, because of people who have gone before me and may not have gone the distance.
I love
And so
that.
I'm trying to complete that distance for them,
Oh, I love
right?
that.
I stand on their shoulders. And so when I get tired, I remember that there's a reason to do this. There haven't
Mm,
been many people before me where I am. So I think about people who were not able to go the distance before me, right? I
mhm.
mean, the higher education community, higher ed, when it was founded, was not built for people like me. It was built for you know, rich
Yeah.
white men from
Right.
legacy families who had wives at home doing whatever they needed to do, and they could
Mm-hmm.
just think important thoughts and write important things and have everything else taken care of for them, right?
Right, right, right.
And so I stay the course because um, for people who could not go the distance, and so that people
Mm-hmm.
like me can also go the distance after me.
I love that. So beautiful. That's beautiful. So, when you look out through college fully funded, through the students you work with, through your academic community, what makes you excited about the broader community that you're working with?
Ah, higher education is going through all kinds of growing pains right now. And what makes me excited is what's going to come out at the end of that,
Mm. Mm-hmm.
right? That definitely things are going to change, but hopefully they change for the better. This community is a little bit more inclusive, more welcoming to all kinds of people. I hope that. I also look down the road and for college fully funded, and I see a bunch of students who get accepted into all kinds of colleges across the country without having to think about taking on debt.
Mm-hmm. I love that. And what trend are you seeing, Faith? Would you say across academic institutions? I ask. A lot of the communities I work with are in Central Appalachia,
Hmm.
and a lot of community colleges are available at no cost. Now, in West Virginia, there's no cost to attend community college. In Virginia, there's a trend. My niece, Olivia, is graduating from high school on Saturday. That's in late May. I know we're going to be releasing this episode later in the summer. But New Mexico just made for New Mexico residents, now college is free. And it just opens up the door for so many people. Do you think it's a trend that's going to continue in terms of colleges either changing fees or making it more accessible? Because it does seem like there's a bubble that is bursting to some degree.
Yeah, you're right on the money there because over the years, the cost of college has increased exponentially
Mm-hmm.
with and hasn't kept and household incomes haven't kept pace with it. So
Mm-hmm.
it's definitely getting to an unsustainable level. And like you said, many states are trying to figure out what to do. I heard about the New Mexico case. I think it's still a pilot project where they're going to
Okay.
try it out for a year and see what
Okay.
happens. But states are being forced to do something about it because
Mm-hmm.
it's a little unsustainable. We'll see where it goes. Um, I don't know. I don't know how it's going to turn out.
Mm-hmm.
But something has to give at some
Mm-hmm.
point.
Yeah, absolutely.
Otherwise, people are not going to see college as a viable um, economic opportunity that it's
Mm-hmm.
supposed to be
Mm-hmm.
anymore
Mm-hmm.
if that doesn't change.
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely.
so we'll see.
Yeah, absolutely. And it creates such a different experience, coming out of it college with tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of dollars in debt to some degree
Hmm.
versus being able to say, okay, I've completed that. I'm not in debt and I'm ready for the next thing. Let's go. It's just
Hmm.
such a different point to move out into the world. Speaking from personal experience too, and it is so much work to apply for college funding, for
Yeah.
grants and applications and scholarships. It's almost a part-time job. So I love what you're doing so much. Tell us a little bit about key lessons learned. What key lessons learned would you share with others who are working to find that point of engagement, to find a way to, apply? What key lessons learned would you share?
Look for like-minded people who have the
Mm-hmm.
same goals as you are, as you do, and work together. Nobody does anything alone.
Mm-hmm.
Nobody does anything alone. Nobody goes the distance alone. We all need support. So look for those people who are doing things that you want to do, learn from them, and look for people who are also on the same journey as you so that you can give each other support, whatever it is that you're trying to do.
Love that. I love that. And what do you wish someone told you 5 or 10 years ago about this work? I love this question, but it's a hard one to some degree.
Ah, oh boy.
Ah.
Um, that there are there's so much more. So, I'm looking back 10 years ago, when I started graduate school, I knew I wanted to be an academic. I knew that going in because I didn't go directly from undergrad or anything. Um, but there's so much more to being a member of faculty than just your teaching and your research. There's
Mm-hmm.
so much more. There's the investments in the students' lives, there's investments in the students' outcomes, there's advising, there's all the administrative stuff that you also have to do. Um, so, if someone, just how much more involved it is, I think that's what I would have liked to know. But I
Mm-hmm.
don't have any regrets.
Yeah.
It's been interesting.
Uh-huh. I love that. That's great. Any other thoughts or reflections you'd like to share about the work more broadly? And again, we'll include in the show notes links to how people can find you. Tell us a little bit again about, where you're headed. So any thoughts and reflections and what happens next for College Fully Funded?
Um, Thoughts or reflections. Um, Again, resilience really depends on finding community,
Mm-hmm.
communities that support you, people that you're comfortable with, people that can go on the journey with you.
Mm-hmm.
Um, in terms of prospects for College Fully Funded, I'm really excited about the cohort that I'm building, and I'm excited about getting a group of students together who, are going to apply to all these colleges and get funding and make things happen for themselves.
Awesome. I can't wait to hear about what happens. We'll include links to your LinkedIn profile and your email address in the show notes. Anything else you'd like to share before we get ready to wrap up today?
It's been really great talking to you. I enjoyed having this conversation.
Yeah, it's been great talking with you, and just what a wonderful resource for folks. So encourage folks to sign up with Faith and the program and let others know about it. It's just such a wonderful resource. So thanks so much for joining the We Rise podcast. It's been such a delight to have you on today. So thank you.
Thank you so much for having me.